Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Love Meets Literature. We are on episode 21. Our podcast is old enough to drink.
Can get a nice Halloween-inspired cocktail now.
Yes, it can. Before we begin, I'm your host, Rachel, and you can find me on Instagram at Paperbacks and Sketchbooks.
And I am your other host, Joe, and you can find us at Love Meets Literature.
Please do give us a follow. It will help us immensely. So how's it going?
What are you, Isabella from Phineas and Ferb?
I am always Isabella from Phineas and Ferb. I'm always like, what you doing?
That's true. It's going well. I'm assuming you're referring to my reading.
I am referring to your reading because I haven't seen you pick up a book.
I read under the cover of night when you're not looking.
Oh, I see. Well, that's usually when I'm also reading, so I'm not really paying attention to anything else.
Exactly. I have been reading. I set myself a goal of reading 15 minutes a day since we last spoke, and I have only broken that twice. In my defense, the one day I was very tired, but the other day there was really no excuse. I definitely could have done it. I just didn't. But every other day I've read at least 15 minutes every day, and I've been working through the next Witcher book, The Tower of Swallows, and it's very good so far. I really like it.
Well, that's good. Is it referring to swallows like the bird?
I believe so. I think the tower has been alluded to in previous books. They haven't really gotten to it yet in this one, but that's, if I'm remembering correctly, then yes, I believe it has to do with birds. I think it's also kind of a imagery for like it literally swallows people or something like that, or I think you get lost in it, something along those lines.
Interesting. The more you talk about The Witcher, the more I'm intrigued by it and the more I feel like I need to read it just so I understand what you always talk about.
I would be very interested to see your perspective reading The Witcher the same way you are with me reading ACOTAR.
True. That is a really brilliant idea that you have there.
I'm just so curious about your perspective on like the lovey scenes or the romance scenes and things like that, because they're so different than I feel like normal romance.
And they're also written by a man. The romance
Yes.
I read is not written by men, it's written by women.
That is a very important factor. Yes.
Yeah, although I have read some Nicholas Sparks and he like sprinkles in romance in his books. And I think he does a good job. So I mean, I guess it depends on the man writing it.
That's true. There's certain things about the Witcher books that have always, I don't really know how to phrase it, kind of made me uncomfortable.
Yeah, I've seen a couple people who have read The Witcher on Instagram, and the accounts are run by girls. And they always have some sort of complaint regarding something that's happening in the book. And they say specifically because it's written by a man.
Yeah. Like there's a lot of the things, and I'm a guy saying this, gonna clarify that if you can't tell by the tone of my voice, but there's some things that I feel like the way that it's written, because it's from a guy writing it, it's creepy rather than giving depth to a character.
I can see that.
But besides those things, the action parts in the story and the lore is extremely good.
Well, that's good.
Yes, and I would still recommend it. Like, there's a lot of other books that I think get way creepier or gorier or something like that. This is still not that bad. It's really more just like a misstep from, or maybe not a misstep, but like a disconnect between author and page and writer possibly. But if you can kind of get through that or ignore it, then I think it's a fantastic series.
Well, I guess I'll have to add it to my list. My TBR just keeps growing.
It is like 8 books or 7 books, so it's quite a lot. If you read the whole entire thing with the 3 prequels and then the 5 in the main set.
You see, I thought you were referring to my TBR for a second, that my TBR is only 8 books. And I was like, you are sorely mistaken.
No, it's like add a couple of zeros to the end of that.
Add maybe, 3 or 4 zeros, and that's my TBR. Well, I've had a pretty good past reading week. I finished off a couple of books. So I recently finished A Sorceress Comes to Call by T. Kingfisher, and I surprisingly actually really liked it. It's more of your fantasy horror blend. It was a dark reimagining of a Brothers Grimm fairy tale called The Goose Girl. I am not familiar with the fairy tale. I read this book because it is our Myth of the Month September pick. So I'm part of this little book club on Instagram called Myth of the Month. And every month we read something that's based on a retelling. And this was a retelling of the Brothers Grimm Goose Girl. It is vastly different from the original fairy tale. I looked up a little bit about what the original is about after I finished this book, and there are a lot of differences, and the author also made this a very, very dark reimagining.
That's kind of interesting that they went the darker route, because I believe the Grimm fairy tales, aren't they known already for being pretty dark?
They do have those underlying themes of creepiness and whatnot.
Right.
But this author took it in like a whole different direction. I'm not going to go over what the original Goose Girl is about because I would just confuse you. But this book is about a young girl. She's 14. Her name is Cordelia. And she lives with her mother, Evangeline. And Evangeline is a sorceress. And she always has Cordelia under a obedience spell so she can control her daughter. She's not always under the spell though. So Cordelia is always very thankful when she's not under the obedience spell because she hates it. And Evangeline also has this like evil horse that's her familiar named Falada. And my least favorite part of the story was when it was revealed, spoilers if you haven't read it and you plan to, Cordelia was under the impression that Falada was her friend, her horse friend, her only friend. So she would tell all of her secrets to Falada. And then she found out that her mother controls Falada and knows everything that Cordelia told the horse because it's an evil horse. It wasn't really Cordelia's friend. And it broke my heart. It made me so sad.
Yeah, that's pretty messed up.
It was so messed up. Just a whole lot of terrible things happen with Evangeline around. So they end up going to a rich guy's mansion and they stay there. And Evangeline is trying to manipulate him into marrying her so they'll have money and be rich. And everyone thinks Evangeline is like kind of weird and evil and they don't like her. Obviously, Cordelia is the only one who knows that she's a sorceress, an
Right.
evil sorceress. So it just all goes from there. And the ending was very gory. And like, that's when the horror elements like really came out. It had to do with the horse. It's like haunted horse things happening. It's weird and it's crazy, but I could not put the book down at that point.
What did you end up rating it?
I gave it 4 stars because I did think it was a solid reimagining of the original after I went and looked up what the original was about, but it did vary, as I said. But I liked the author's spin on it and I liked her take on it. And I found the storytelling to be super captivating. However, the pacing at the beginning was a little bit slow for me, and I wasn't fully invested in the story until maybe halfway through. So that's why it gets 4 stars. But once I hit like the creepy horse part, that's when I was like, okay, this book is actually pretty good. A Sorceress Comes to Call by T. Kingfisher. Solid read if you're looking for something dark, if you need a retelling for any reading challenges or whatever. It is a retelling of the Brothers Grimm fairy tale Goose Girl. So that's what I've enjoyed reading this week. And I'm very excited for this episode. We are diving into another TBR spotlight because my TBR is just all sorts of out of hand at the moment. And I've decided that today I'm going to be spotlighting 4 Aardvark book club books that I have not read yet that are sitting on my actual shelf.
I'm going to be highlighting 4 books that, well, 3 of them I forgot were even on my TBR, and then one I had to go and search for because I didn't have enough.
I'm jealous of your very small TBR.
If there was like, if I could paint a picture, your TBR is like the ginormous library, I think Library of Congress or something that's got like all the books in it. That's yours.
My
And
library is the Library of Congress.
mine is like, imagine being stranded on an island and then people ask you like, what 3 books do you want to bring? That's my TBR. It's like just those 3 books.
I mean, at least if you were stranded on an island, you'd finish your TBR.
That's true. Like probably a million times over.
I would not finish my TBR if I was stranded on an island.
How many books are on your TBR?
Well, I currently own almost 200 books now. Of those, I have to read about 140 of them. And then my entire TBR on Goodreads and Storygraph. So it's probably like 400 or 500 books.
That's wild.
But I want to read everything is the problem. Like anytime a new book is released that sounds good, I usually read it close to when it's released. So then that pushes another book back that was on my list to read next.
I see.
I don't really plan my reading anyway. It's just I'm a mood reader. I kind of just pick as I go.
For reference, I have 54 books on my TBR, according to Storygraph.
I thought you only had 3.
Well, it was an analogy. The Library of Congress has like 10,000 books or something in it.
Oh, okay. I thought you were actually serious about only having 3 books on your TBR.
No, I have 54. Mind you, though, like 19 of those are from a single series. So
What series are you reading with 19 books in it?
the Dresden Files
Oh.
has, I think it's 21 in total, or maybe it's 19 in total.
So are you the person that adds an entire series to your TBR before you read the first book?
I have read the first and the second, but that's it so far.
Okay. So, I mean, I guess that makes sense then. I usually don't add an entire series to my TBR. I usually just add the first book, and then I don't really even keep up with adding things to my TBR. If it's on my TBR, like I kind of just have a mental note of it. I don't always track it online.
See, that's kind of like I'm the complete opposite. Like the other ones too, the Victor the Assassin series, that's also like 10 books or 11 books, and I added all of those. So literally 70% of my TBR is 2 different series. That's why I have like nothing on there, because I can't just pick like number 9 in a series to be like, hey, let's talk about this one. I mean, I guess I could. Maybe it's super interesting, but...
Yeah, but then it would make no sense and it would spoil things for you for the rest of the series.
Right, which is why I didn't do that.
Well, I guess that makes sense then, but I'm still jealous of your 54 book TBR.
Well, it's funny because I'm a little jealous of yours. You would have so many to choose from.
I know, but do you know how stressful it is? If I could read all day, every day, I could really knock out my TBR.
That's true.
Anyway, before we dive into our TBRs, I have to know what you are obsessing over this week.
It's probably a video game. It's typically been video games lately. I've been playing less Street Fighter, but that's mainly been from time constraints. I've been playing a lot of Deadlock. It's a new, or like the newest Valve game, and it's really fun. It's like a third-person shooter MOBA game. So for people that are familiar, Smite is kind of like a third-person MOBA. It's that, but make it into a shooter and more mobility and things like that. And it's made by Valve. So a lot of the art and textures and even like the voice actors and things like that are from the classic Valve team. So like Team Fortress 2. So it's kind of like a weird hit of nostalgia when I play it. And I think that's what pulled me into it so much. The gameplay itself is also fun, but I guess if I had to pick something, it's probably that. I've been playing quite a bit of it.
How exciting.
Yes, very exciting. What about you? What are you obsessed with this week?
I am obsessed with painting. I busted out my art supplies last week and I've just, been spiraling from there. All I want to do is paint. I used to paint a lot of birds when I was in high school. It was like my thing. I did a whole bird series for an art auction. So I decided I don't know what to paint, so I'm just going to go back to painting birds. So I've painted a goldfinch, I've painted a hummingbird, I painted a penguin, and I painted a cardinal. So I'm very proud of all of them. Some I'm more proud of than others, but obviously artists are their own biggest critic. So it's been fun though. I love making art of all kinds, like crochet, embroidery, painting. It's all fun.
Yeah, they look really good. I'm looking at them all right now.
It's very relaxing, even though it takes me like 5 hours start to finish to paint one bird.
Art is extremely stressful for me, so it's hard to relate. But I'm glad that it makes you happy.
If you go into art with the mindset that it is going to be stressful, then obviously you're not going to enjoy whatever you're painting. The whole point of art is to relax and de-stress, not be stressed over creating the next Picasso or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying. I always end up enjoying it more after the fact. It's kind of like forcing yourself to work out, like you feel better after you do it. And that's kind of how art is for me. I just get so stressed in the moment, like doing things. So I don't understand colors, but
hey, I don't really understand colors either, but I do what feels right. Like the painting, once I start, it like tells me what to do.
I think your brain is wired differently. I don't know. Because I've heard people say that, like they just kind of know, or that just, they fall into it almost.
Yeah, because I mean, with paints or like doing whatever your medium is, obviously if you make a mistake, you can't always erase it. So you kind of have to figure out what to do with the mistake. You can create something from it. You can, if you're really mad about it, you can trash the whole thing and start over. But I don't recommend doing that. Art involves a lot of problem solving in that scenario, which is fun. It makes it fun.
Very interesting. Just again, I think our brains are wired differently.
Yeah, like I guess so.
Maybe that's what it takes to be an artist, which is, impressive.
But also, people are probably wondering why my Instagram handle is paperbacks and sketchbooks. And it's that because I like reading and I like art.
That's true. You do like those two things.
So now I hope the username makes sense to more people. So you are obsessed with video games. I'm obsessed with painting. Two wildly different interests. But that's okay. Now getting into our TBRs, I picked 4 books that were on my physical shelf that are specifically Aardvark picks that I have not read yet. And I really need to get to them. So this is sort of my reminder of why I chose them and what they're about. So maybe the next book I read will be an Aardvark pick.
Let's hope.
So the first one is Mistress of Lies by K.M. Enright. This is a fantasy book. It has to do with vampires. Fate is a cruel mistress. The daughter of a powerful but disgraced blood worker, Shan Leclerc has spent her entire life perfecting her blood magic, building her network of spies and gathering every scrap of power she could. Now, to protect her brother, she assassinates their father and takes her place at the head of the family. And that is only the start of her revenge. Samuel Hutchinson has a terrible gift. When he stumbles upon the first victim of a magical serial killer, he's drawn into the world of magic and intrigue he's worked so hard to avoid, and is pulled deeply into the ravenous and bloodthirsty court of the Vampire King. Tasked by the Eternal King to discover the identity of the killer cutting a bloody swath through the city, Samuel, Shan, and mysterious royal bloodworker Isaac find themselves growing ever closer to each other. But Shan's plans are treacherous, and as she lures Samuel into her complicated web of desire, treason, and vengeance, He must decide if the good of their nation is worth the cost of his soul. So this sounded like something a little out of my comfort zone when I selected it in my Aardvark box, but it also sounded so good. And sometimes I like experimenting with the fantasy books that I choose because I don't want to just stick with romantasy. I want to read something that sounds like it has more of that straight up fantasy plot. Like, sure, it's fine if there's like romance on the side, like whatever. A lot of books do that these days. But I don't want it to be like straight up romantasy all the time. Like the romance isn't the main focus. So I'm really excited to read this someday, whenever I get to it.
Someday. That one does sound very interesting.
It does. And I think the cover also really drew me in as well. It's like red and white and black, and just like I can kind of tell the vibe of the book from the cover, which I love when publishers do that. So I'm very excited to dive into it.
First up on my list is Six of Crows by Lee Bardugo. Ketterdam, a bustling hub of international trade where anything can be had for the right price. And no one knows that better than criminal prodigy Kaz Breckner. Kaz is offered a chance at a deadly heist that could make him rich beyond his wildest dreams, but he can't pull it off alone. A convict with a thirst for revenge. A sharpshooter who can't walk away from a wager. A runaway with a privileged past. A spy known as the Wraith. A heartrender using her magic to survive the slums. A thief with a gift for unlikely escapes. 6 dangerous outcasts. 1 impossible heist. Kaz's crew is the only thing that might stand between the world and destruction if they don't kill each other first. So this is a medium to fast-paced young adult novel, and it's part of a duology. This is also obviously fantasy, because that's like all I read, but it also seems kind of dark, intense, and I really like the cover of this one. It just looks really good.
I also have this one on my TBR, and I'm very excited to get to it. I know a lot of people loved Six of Crows, so I'm also very much looking forward to it.
I'm just a sucker for anything that has heists in it.
I know you are.
I don't know why. I just love it so much.
Please don't go conducting your own heist.
No thanks. I prefer to watch them or read them.
Next up on my TBR is You Know What You Did by KT Wynn. And this is a thriller. Annie An Lee Shaw grew up poor, but seems to have it all now. A dream career, a stunning home, and a devoted husband and daughter. When Annie's mother, a Vietnam War refugee, dies suddenly one night, Annie's carefully curated life begins to unravel. Her obsessive-compulsive disorder, which she thought she'd vanquished years ago, comes roaring back. But this time, the disturbing fixations swirling around in Annie's brain might actually be coming true. A prominent art patron disappears, and the investigation zeroes in on Annie. Spiraling with self-doubt, she distances herself from her family and friends, only to wake up in a hotel room, naked, next to a lifeless body. The police have more questions, but with her mind increasingly fractured, Annie doesn't have answers. All she knows is this: she will do anything to protect her daughter, even if it means losing herself. This is both a harrowing thriller and a heartfelt exploration of the refugee experience, the legacies we leave for our children, and the unbreakable bonds between mothers and daughters. So I got this when I was in my thriller phase, and I'll read it one day. I mean, it does sound really interesting now that I'm refreshing my memory. The cover was also like eerie and ominous, so I loved that. And again, it sounds like something that's a little different from the usual thriller that I pick up, so I'm excited to get to it.
Could be a good Halloween read.
It could. I'm trying to read more thriller books this season because I do have a lot on my physical shelf, and I feel like now's a good time to get to them.
Probably the best time of year to get to them.
Probably. I'm like more in the thriller mood now that it's cooling off outside. It's like rainy and gloomy, and it just gives off the perfect thriller reading vibes.
That's true. This is also the time of year that you like to watch Criminal Minds again.
Ooh, don't remind me. Otherwise, we'll be watching Criminal Minds all night.
True. All right. Next up on my list is The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov. One hot spring, the devil arrives in Moscow, accompanied by a team that includes a beautiful naked witch and an immense talking black cat with a fondness for chess and vodka. The visitors quickly wreak havoc in the city that refuses to believe in either God or Satan. But they also bring peace to two unhappy Muscovites. One is the Master, a writer pillared for daring to write a novel about Christ and Pontius Pilate. The other is Margarita, who loves the Master so deeply that she's willing to literally go to hell for him. What ensues is a novel of inexhaustible energy, humor, and philosophical depth. This one seems super interesting because it has the biblical aspect, and I really liked the story of the Unholy Night, which was a biblical retelling. It's also very interesting that this book was published a very long time ago. It was actually published in the 1930s, but because
What?
it was so accurate to living under Soviet Russia, it was censored, and they reissued a censored version in the 1960s, and then eventually it was fully published without its censors in, I believe it said, the late 60s or early 70s. So it's very old, it's very witty, it's got this magical realism to it. It's supposed to be very funny. They say there's a lot of funniness and witty humor and dialogue, so I'm really looking forward to that.
That's interesting. I feel like you always dig random books up out of their graves and you read them and you bring them to life.
I guess that's true. That does apply for a couple of books that I've read where it's just I feel like someone goes, where on earth did you find that?
Well, that's what I was like. I was like, how does one even find this book that was originally published in the 1930s that's had so many revisions and it's about these Russians or whatever?
I actually have no idea where I found this.
How did you find this?
I was just scrolling down my TBR and it was on there and I went, oh yeah, I forgot about this one.
Interesting. I'd love to know how you came across it.
If I remember, I'll let you know.
All right, then. My next book is Valley Verified by Kyla Zhao, and this is contemporary fiction. On paper, Zoe Zhang has made it in New York's fashion world. After a string of unpaid internships, she's now a fashion columnist at Chic, lives in a quaint apartment in Manhattan, and gets invited to exclusive industry events. But life in New York City isn't as chic as Zoe imagined. Her editor wants her to censor her opinions to please the big brands. She shares her quaint apartment with 3 roommates who never let her store kimchi in the fridge. And how is she supposed to afford the designer clothes expected for those parties on her meager salary? Then one day, Zoe receives a job offer at FitPick, an app startup based in Silicon Valley. The tech salary and office perks are sweet, but moving across the country and switching to a totally new industry, not so much. However, with her current career at a dead end, Zoe accepts the offer and swaps high fashion for high tech, haute couture for HTML. But she soon realizes that in an industry claiming to change the world for the better, not everyone's intentions are pure. With an 8-figure investment on the line, Zoe must find a way to revamp FitPick's image despite Silicon Valley's elitism and her icy colleagues. Or the company's future will go up in smoke, and hers with it. So this one sounds lighthearted and fun, and what really grabbed me was that it has the New York fashion element at the beginning, and then she totally does the career change into tech. And I'm just curious to see how her experiences with the fashion magazine translate to what she does in the tech world.
That's true. I would be super curious to know this story and kind of what happens. I don't know if I quite would want to read it myself, but I would love to hear a recap.
I do really want to read this now. It sounds super intriguing. I love character-driven stories like this. I want to know how she fares in Silicon Valley versus how she was faring in New York with her seems like inconsiderate roommates and her boss wanting her to please big brands, even though that's like against journalism ethics. So I think this is going to be very, very good.
I agree. I also really liked that little kind of transitional joke humor that they threw into that description.
The haute couture for HTML.
Yeah. That's actually very funny. I like it.
It is funny. And so I know this book is going to have humor. I love me some lighthearted, fun book that also has an underlying challenging element to it.
It's true. It's a complicated thing to do, but if you can do it, what's not to like? Next on my list is Between Two Fires by Christopher Bullman. The year is 1348. The Black Death ravages France, leaving fields and rivers choked with unburied dead and causing whole towns to disappear. Thomas, a disgraced knight, roams the lands with a band of thieves, living by the sword. When they encounter an orphan girl in the dying village, Thomas has just enough humanity in him to save her from his colleagues. No ordinary child, this girl sees angels and talks to the dead. She tells Thomas that Lucifer and the fallen angels have risen in a new war on heaven, and the kingdoms of men have fallen behind the lines of battle, and that he must now shepherd her on a holy quest to tip the scales in the favor of good. Between Two Fires invites you on a journey that is once a fool's errand into great danger, and a violent man's first uncertain steps towards redemption. Funny enough, I didn't plan for this. This is also another biblical kind of story. And I can't remember the exact story that this relates to, but it's more so a reimagining of a story, if I'm remembering correctly. That said, I love a redemption story. It's kind of a soft spot for me. I'm always a sucker for that. Heists kind of fit into that too, because usually someone's doing something for a good reason, so there's a little bit of a redemption there. But this one just seemed really interesting. I'm really looking forward to this one. I kind of want to throw it up on my, like, to be read next pile.
You'll have to find it somewhere.
Yeah, I have no idea where I will find this.
The library. The final book I will be discussing from my TBR is For Her Consideration by Amy Spalding, and this is a romance. Since a crushing breakup 3 years ago, Nina Rice has written romance, friends, her dreams of scriptwriting for TV, and even LA out of her life. Instead, she's safely out in the suburbs in her aunt's condo, working her talent agency job from home, managing celebrity email accounts, and certain that's plenty of writing and plot for her life. But a surprise meeting called by Ari Fox, a young actress on everyone's radar, stirs up all kinds of feelings Nina thought she deleted for good. Ari is sexy, out and proud, and a serious control freak, according to Nina's boss. She has her own ideas about how Nina should handle her emails and about getting to know her ghostwriter. When she tells Nina she should be writing again, Nina suddenly finds it less scary to revisit her abandoned life than seriously consider that Ari is flirting with her. Between reconnecting with her old crew and working on a new script, a relationship with a movie star seems like something she'll definitely mess up. But what could be more worth the risk? So I got this when I was really in my romance era, and what made me want to get this book was the whole Hollywood aspect. I just think it's super interesting to read about. So, I mean, I'll get to this one day. It's not like sparking any joy for me at the moment, but maybe one day when I'm back in my romance era, I will get there.
It does remind me of that one episode in Criminal Minds, not to mention it again, but, and spoilers if you haven't watched it, but when Reed has that fling with like that, I think she was a movie star or a TV show star in the show, something. She was famous of some kind.
It was with Amber Heard.
Oh, right.
He had a fling with Amber Heard. I don't remember her name in the show, but yeah, Reed did have a little fling with an actress, and it was like super weird, and I hated that whole plot line.
You didn't like that one?
No, not really. I wasn't a huge fan of it.
I mean, I thought it was all right. I was just happy that like Reed was getting some attention, you know? I felt like he deserved it. He's a smart guy.
He's like the best character on the show.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Yeah, but I love like anything Hollywood, New York, like big city in books. And I think it's because I don't like the big city in real life.
So you can like kind of live through the book.
Yeah, I can live in the big city through the book. But then it like makes me want to go to the big city when I read the book, even though like realistically I know like I would hate it. But sometimes I really want to see the spots that they're talking about in the book.
I guess that's fair. Yeah. Because I like read, you know, those fantasy books, and there's kind of that in the back of your mind. You're like, oh, it'd be so cool to be like the Witcher, right? Like roaming the land and fending for yourself. But then in reality, you have to remind yourself that there's like a whole point in the story where he's eating like nasty gruel as food. And like, yeah, that part I wouldn't like.
And yeah, I couldn't do that. I can't give up good food.
So it's like the same concept. Like the idea of it sounds awesome. But then maybe when you go there, it's like smelly and busy.
Yeah, New York is smelly. It's gross.
Hey, they finally got their trash cans though.
Yeah, finally.
So they're getting better. All right. Last up on my list is American Gods by Neil Gaiman. A storm is coming. Locked behind bars for 3 years, Shadow did his time, quietly waiting for the magic day when he can return to Eagle Point, Indiana. A man no longer scared of what tomorrow might bring. All he wanted was to be with Laura, the wife he deeply loved. But just days before his release, Laura and Shadow's best friend are killed in a car accident. With his life in pieces and nothing to keep him tethered, Shadow accepts a job from a beguiling stranger he meets on his way home, an enigmatic man who calls himself Mr. Wednesday. A trickster and a rogue, Wednesday seems to know more about Shadow than Shadow does himself. Life as Wednesday's bodyguard, driver, and errand boy is far more interesting and dangerous than Shadow ever imagined. It is a job that takes him on a dark and strange road trip and introduces him to a host of eccentric characters whose fate are mysteriously intertwined with his own. Along the way, Shadow will learn that the past never dies, that everyone, including his beloved Laura, harbors secrets, and that dreams, totems, legends, and myths are more real than we know. Ultimately, he will discover that beneath the placid surface of everyday life, a storm is brewing, an epic war for the very soul of America, and that he is standing squarely in its path. This one is much slower, according to Storygraph ratings, compared to, I feel like, a lot of other books that I've read. That said, it seems really good. Like, it's obviously fiction and it has these fantasy elements, but from what I can tell, it does take place in like, I think it's like an older America, like think maybe 1980s, 1990s, I believe. It was also a TV show though on Stars. It aired in 2017, but then was unfortunately canceled in 2021 after 3 seasons. And funny enough, it's written by a British author.
Interesting.
Yeah, I didn't expect that. You know, story American Gods. I feel like it'd be written by someone in America, but who am I to judge?
You're not, I guess.
Well, not until I read it.
So we have pretty good lists. I feel like they all sound super interesting, and I really don't know which of mine I would read first. I think I'm most intrigued by Valley Verified at the moment.
I said Between Two Fires, but skimming through this again, The Master and Margarita just sounds incredibly intriguing. I think I might have to bump that one to the top of my list.
It sounds so different.
Yeah.
Like, I'm pretty sure I've never read a book like that before. So hopefully it's good.
Yeah, and I could really use a funny book. So I really do hope it's funny.
Well, I mean, it might have like a drier humor, but
Yeah, I think it's supposed to be like a little satirical. I hope I understand it because I'm not super familiar with what 1930s Soviet Russia was like, but hopefully you don't have to be there to understand it.
true. So obviously, I won't be getting to any of these TBR books this week But this week I am working on a Mary Higgins Clark book, Loves Music, Loves to Dance. And it's like so freaky so far. It reminds me of something that would happen in a Criminal Minds episode. So the book opens up with this man named Charlie, and he is basically a serial killer. And the way he kills his victims is he places personal ads in the newspaper. So this book takes place in like the 80s or 90s, probably, where people were placing personal ads for dates and whatnot. It was like their version of online dating. So he places personal ads in the newspaper and he waits for women to respond to them, and they'll go out and he'll bring them back to his house, and he puts on music and he asks if they want to dance. And then usually at that point they're like a little weirded out and they like get creeped out and they're like, no, I don't really want to dance. But he traps them in his house and he strangles them. And the creepiest part is that he has like a whole closet full of dancing shoes in all different women's sizes. So he makes them try on the shoes before he kills them. And then when he kills them, he takes a shoe off and replaces it with their original shoe.
That really does sound like a Criminal Minds episode.
Yeah, and then he like buries the bodies in the backyard. And so this book is following the murder investigation of a woman named Erin Kelly. So it's super interesting. I love how Mary Higgins Clark lays out a story, because we know Charlie is like this creepy man, but we don't know if Charlie is his real name. We assume it's not so far. And there are other male characters mentioned in the story that are a little skeevy that could be Charlie's regular personality. So
Oh, that's super interesting. I like that idea.
it's so interesting. Like, I wasn't really thinking much of it. I was like, oh, these are just like random guys that are like doing their jobs and whatnot and interacting with our main character. But now that I think about it, I'm like, there's definitely something off with Charlie, our killer. Like, something's not right. Like, you can tell from the very first chapter when we see his point of view. So now it makes me think that maybe he has like a personality disorder. He has multiple personalities. And one of these other guys that Mary Higgins Clark is having us follow could be his other personality.
That's an extremely clever way to write a book. That's super cool.
Yes. And I just love that she always has so many characters and so many points of view that it gives that suspense element like some oomph, and it like really makes you think, like, who is Charlie? Who is this man?
I like that. It probably pulls you in as well. Feels like a lot of immersion because you're getting all of the different aspects.
Yeah, and it really breaks up the story and it makes it move really fast instead of just getting like us following our main character kind of investigating the death of her friend. It's broken up by the FBI investigator's point of view, another friend's point of view, her former like boss's point of view, and whatever. So there's a lot, and it's really, really good so far.
Are her other books a lot of point of views like that?
Yes, at least the ones I've read. So like Pretend You Don't See Her, You Belong to Me, and Where Are the Children? I've read those 3, and they were all like that. So I'm assuming it's just a thing that she does.
And I'm forgetting, is she mainly like this suspense thrillery writer?
She is the queen of suspense.
Right. Now that I hear you say that, that sounds very familiar.
Yes, so her books are really good. I've enjoyed all of the ones that I've read so far.
They sound good.
Super good. It's like very fitting for the Halloween season. So I'm reading Loves Music, Loves to Dance by Mary Higgins Clark. What are you reading this week?
I am working through The Tower of Swallows, which is the 5th Witcher book, I believe, or 6th. Can't remember. And then I'm also reading Snapshot by Brandon Sanderson still. I made it through one more chapter, and I'm going to really push myself this week to finish one of those 2. Snapshot should be a lot easier because it's only like 50 or 60 pages left, but one of them, I will do it.
You can do it.
I believe in myself.
So it's been pretty quiet on the cooking front for you. I know you were working your way through some cookbooks, but that seems to have paused. I haven't got to eat anything delicious recently.
That's true. I haven't made anything out of the cookbooks yet. I had the inspiration to make ramen, and I really wanted to do that. And then life kind of got in the way a little bit. So I'll probably have to re-up on that. But I believe the next thing I was going to make in the cookbook was, well, no, I made the sandwich bread.
You did make the sandwich bread, and that was really good.
It was super good.
You need to make another sandwich loaf. I could just eat the loaf by itself. I don't even need to make a sandwich. So what's up next in your cookbook?
Up next was going to be roti, but I decided to skip that one and do brioche bread instead.
I love brioche.
Yes.
Is it easy? Is it like something you can make right now?
I didn't realize that Babish had a section of brioche. So it's brioche, hamburger buns, and then also garlic monkey bread.
Oh, that sounds so good. I'm so hungry.
Yeah, I'm starving too. I just keep smelling the food that we have in the kitchen. But the other thing was in Claire Saffitz's cookbook, Dessert Person. I saw that she has a apple tart, I believe is what it was called.
Ooh.
And I really want that. It's perfect time for it too.
It is. Oh, that sounds so delicious. I need you to like start whipping out these recipes because I just want to eat everything.
Yeah, me too.
And I mean, Claire Saffitz, love her. So I know her recipes are going to be amazing.
Like, look at that. That's the
That
apple
looks
tart.
delicious. I wish you all could see the photo because it looks so good.
I believe she also has her recipe for the apple tart on her YouTube channel.
That's so nice. I love when cookbook authors do that. They actually show them making the recipe in a video. So that way, if you get lost or you don't know what to do, you can just look at the video.
Yeah, I really need to go through her cookbook because like a ton of her recipes are on her YouTube channel. And she even explains things like to look out for, like tips and tricks and her recommendations. She even corrects some of the stuff that she says. Like in the cookbook, it says this amount, but you can get away with doing it like this if you want less flavor or more flavor or something like that. So, or she riffs on it, like maybe you don't have blueberries, so you can do raspberries for this recipe or something like that. So I really love that.
That sounds awesome. And now I'm going to need you to make a Claire Saffitz recipe.
I'm going to have to. They're pretty complex, but I think I'm ready for the challenge.
You can do it. It's just following directions.
For the most part, yeah.
You can follow directions. You can make a recipe.
I'm pretty good at following directions. Decently.
I hope so. So it was very nice to get to know your TBR a little bit better. I think these episodes are always so fun because I never know what's on your TBR. It's always a surprise.
Well, I guess that's good, I think. I'm not sure.
And again, it's always the most random books.
Now that is true, yeah.
But it's fine. It's because you're not on Bookstagram. I feel like my TBR is curated by books I see online. And it's not curated by just what I find on Storygraph or Goodreads.
Yeah, I guess that's true. You get a lot more exposure than I do.
Yeah, but sometimes Bookstagram doesn't recommend the best books. So
That's fair. I like this for you as well because it's an opportunity to go back in your huge catalog and look at like kind of what you said at the beginning, like the reason you picked it out in the first place, which is, I think that's really cool.
yeah, it reminds me why I need to read it.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of like a little bit of a, reminder, like fun reason of like, oh yeah, I do remember why I picked that one or something like that, especially because you're a mood reader. So I feel like it gets you back into the mood again.
Yep, exactly. Well, I'm about ready to go dive back into my freaky book, Loves Music, Loves to Dance, because it's getting so good. And I hope everybody has a wonderful week. It's finally feeling like fall outside, so maybe you can spend some time outdoors without sweating profusely for once. And as always, happy reading.